Spooky, spooky, very spooky. Oh no, it's a monster. Spooky, spooky.
Happy January spooktacular event.
Horn noises.
It's the Boob Tube Boys. I'm Van Lee, and we are here to read you creepypastas. Hopefully you listened to the previous episode, because if you did, you heard the explanation of what Brian Vaughn,
That's me.
Spencer Hendricks, and I, here I am, are doing. And that is reading creepypastas, but not just any creepypasta, ladies and gentlemen. This time we're reading creepypastas written by us. I wrote a story, Spencer wrote a story, Brian wrote a story.
Yeah, we did.
We exchanged them, and we're reading them now to you,
It's pretty
the
cool.
listener.
It's not on the internet anywhere, and they weren't generated by AI. They were just written by us in the moment, and just like the old-fashioned people used to do it.
I think you could argue it's generated by AI average intelligence. Just kidding. We're a bunch of smarty pantses in this room.
I thought you were going to give one of us a nickname that was AI. You know, those were the initials.
Yeah, Allen Iverson had that nickname. And
Albeit intrinsically.
So did some kid in the movie AI.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. What was that about?
I probably should see that again. I don't really remember it at all.
Is that Robin Williams?
It was Haley Joel Osment when he was the child
That's
actor,
right.
and then I
Okay.
don't know anyone else that was in that.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since it came out either.
There's some kind of story about how robots have feelings too, I think. But I'd have to watch it again.
I think in light of AI and the state of the world right now, we need to go back, or maybe for the first time, revisit our idea that we should be treating robots well.
Here's what I recommend everyone to do, and maybe this will inform your opinion of AI.
You watch Ex Machina.
Watch Ex Machina. That is
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say.
I think about that all the time.
Good movie.
My favorite part of it was still where I can't think of his name, Oscar Isaacson.
Yeah.
He,
Just Isaac.
Isaac, not
But I
Isaacson.
understand why you said that, because then you're in the two first names thing with
Yep.
Oscar Isaac.
Just keeps happening again. But he is with the robot lady, and he makes her dance, and they dance to Get Down
Yeah,
Saturday
it's
Night.
an incredibly choreographed
amazing.
scene, too. And
Phenomenal.
the other thing is,
General Hux is there.
putting all my cards on the table right now, that robot would kill the shit out of me, too.
Absolutely.
I would be trapped there to die just like Domhnall Gleeson. Spoiler alert.
That's a good movie. Go watch it. And it really makes you think.
It does. It's just a really good fucking movie.
I thought about that one that way, and also Her did a lot for me too in
Agreed.
that time period.
I still haven't seen it. I'd like
Well,
to.
you
I'd
should. like to rewatch
You really
it.
should see that again.
Recently, I read something, someone kind of dismissing it now, but the more I've thought about that movie, I'm like, maybe there's something in the way it's portrayed that isn't my favorite. I don't know. I really liked it at the time, though.
Yeah,
But
it's been a
every
while.
time I think about it, I think that a lot of what it had to say is pretty resonant. So we'll see.
Might be Joaquin Phoenix. Because to
That
me,
could be.
boy, I can take him sometimes, and other times I'm like, what is this fucking idiot doing?
He is maybe one of the widest range hit or miss actors because the talent's there.
Well, we're going to find
undeniably
out
so.
if Joaquin Phoenix features in any of the stories today.
Is Joaquin Phoenix what Jared Leto wishes he was, kind of?
100%.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
Okay.
Yes. Don't care for Jared Leto. Spencer Hendricks,
Yeah.
you're up first.
All right, I am up first.
You're going to be reading a story. Whose story is it?
This story is by Brian Vaughn, and
That's
just
me.
as a reminder, we did a
Every
theme.
time someone says my name, I'm going to say that, whether it's starting the episode or now.
So we did a theme last week. We're not doing a theme this week.
No
Brian could have written this about anything at all. We don't even know what it is.
I could have. Spencer, you now in your hands hold the longest one of these I've ever
It
written.
is. It's thick. It feels like a good-sized manuscript.
It's a 3,200 worder. It's
That's about the one you just read from me last week. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty standard territory. It is long, but we have done it.
I've
on Boob
typically
Tube
been
Boys
right around the
creepypastas.
2,000 mark. I didn't know this until today when I went and checked my old ones.
Mine are usually about 30,000 words, I think, because I can't
The
bear
last
them down.
one was.
Yeah, it certainly
Well,
was.
yeah, there's nothing in that could have been cut.
No.
Nothing in Van's story that just says 4 pages of Star Wars names and 4 pages of sex terms could have been cut.
It's all necessary, Brian.
No, I don't disagree,
How would
actually.
you take it away from the artist?
Yeah.
The
Artiste.
artiste.
Well, I think artist has been what you've been. No, I don't think women have fucked in your stories yet.
Don't be silly. Why would that be a thing I write about?
Wasn't there a little bit of a suggestion that
Leia and
yeah,
Han.
yeah.
Oh, but
the standard
yeah,
one.
no.
Yeah, you didn't do it.
Yeah.
It was Chewie.
Leia and Han is a little bit like that robot and Oscar Isaac, and that, you know, that's one of those things where you're like, this seems right to me. You know, this is a couple that belongs together.
Well, let's hear what Brian has to say.
Well, let's hear it.
Maybe it's about doppelgangers.
It might be. He might be like hit us with a double theme and didn't tell us it was happening. You never know.
There's no theme this week. I just liked it so much.
This one is called Saddled with Suspicion.
Ooh, kind of pun-like.
Kind of sounds like a mystery novel.
It does.
Featuring a horse.
I hope so. We'll find out in the coming pages if there is a horse in this.
I don't know that I've had a year where I didn't have a horse in one of mine, actually.
True.
The sun rose upon the wet grass, casting shadows on the Davidson family farm and its many creaky outbuildings. It would have been a breathtaking sight for most, a moment to pause and appreciate the beauty of the natural world. For the cast and crew of Horse Competition 4 Satan in the Stables, it was merely the start of another workday.
Horse Competition 4 : Satan in the Stables?
That's how it is.
Okay.
And we do have our answer on the horses right away. It was merely the start of another workday, another marathon filled with big demands and bigger egos. Horse Competition 4's lead actor, a former network TV star named Kevin Sorbo, was having a different kind of morning than the rest of the people working on the film.
Second story with Sorbo.
Maybe third.
Maybe third story with Sorbo. You're right. I don't recall either.
Do you know what it is when you have Sorbo and then you get him again? You know what that is?
What's that? More Sorbor?
It is.
Sorbo's status as a 90s star afforded him his own trailer, which in turn afforded him a higher degree of peace and privacy than his castmates.
I think it's for the benefit of the castmates.
This privilege was lost on Sorbo as he smiled at his own social media posts and sipped the coffee Joshua, his assistant, brought him earlier. You really got him, Kev, Sorbo chuckled as he admired himself for calling a Democratic senator a godless lib on Twitter. Sorbo used this new supply of dopamine to shoot off a tweet about Democrats letting kids marry snakes in schools and put his phone down to properly enjoy the Newsboys album he put on while watching Joshua make his coffee. I like the detail of him watching him make it.
Smugly.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
A knock at the door disrupted Sorbo's appreciation of Newsboys lead singer Michael Tate, angering the actor. Come in, Sorbo said almost sarcastically as Joshua entered the star's trailer. Mr. Sorbo, there's a woman here. Sorbo quickly stopped Joshua. What did I tell you about knocking during God's Not Dead, Like a Lion, featuring Kevin Max? What did I tell you, Joshua? Sorbo bellowed as his words rattled off the walls of the trailer. I'm very sorry, Mr. Sorbo. I was not able to discern which track from the 2011 Newsboys album God's Not Dead was playing when I approached your trailer. I will extend my knuckle to your door with additional caution in the future, sir.
Is that a real title of a Newsboys album?
Oh, you better believe it.
Because they were in the God's Not Dead movie.
Somebody was on the Wikipedia page for Newsboys.
Okay.
Sorbo felt himself softening toward his assistant, a frail boy for whom he developed an affection despite typically despising any male so small in stature. The way Sorbo figured it, God made small men that way so that they could be stepped on by larger men. Perhaps men who once portrayed Hercules on the USA Network during the Clinton administration. It's fine, Joshua. While I consider apologies gay, I understand them when I'm the one affected. From now on, if you're standing outside the trailer and you hear music, just assume I'm listening to the infectious strains of God's Not Dead, Like a Lion, featuring Kevin Max, and wait until you sense silence inside. Sorbo, now much calmer, took a seat at his trailer's kitchenette table and reclaimed his coffee cup. Joshua sensed an opening to tell Sorbo the urgent news. Mr. Sorbo, there is a woman here who would like to ask you a few questions relating to a horse theft that took place on the set last night. Someone broke into the Davidson family stables and took Big Moses. The only evidence at the crime scene was a handwritten note. The thief says he took Big Moses because he loves Joe Biden and does not want the world to hear the message of Horse Competition 4 because he fears it will unite the world against Satan and the godless libs. Sorbo stood back up in a huff. Well, I don't know why this woman wants to talk to me then. It's clear from this note that the perpetrator is dead set against our mission here. Plus, we all know it's only the libs that like to steal. I'm not sure about her line of questioning, Mr. Sorbo. Should I let her in? Joshua asked, eager to leave and afraid of getting a Jesus is my caffeine mug hurled at his head a second time that week. Sorbo sighed and finally conceded to letting the visitor in. Well, what's her name anyway? Mrs. Melville, sir. She has a bit of a reputation. Some call her the greatest sleuth of her time. They say nothing gets past her. Her apprentice, her granddaughter Eve, is with her as well. Joshua reached for the door handle before Sorbo could change his mind or offer his input on what makes a good woman. Joshua ushered in Mrs. Melville and Eve, who both greeted Sorbo with smiles. Mrs. Melville was a slow-moving woman of about 90, dressed in a fine overcoat and a boxy purple hat with a flower protruding from it. Eve appeared far more casual, wearing a hoodie and sporting a blue streak in her pulled-back hair. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sorbo," Mrs. Melville said as the actor took her tiny hand and tried not to crush it. Eve's greeting was far more subdued, polite nod while making eye contact. Sorbo was suspicious of her from the jump, knowing full well the difficulty women named Eve had brought to men like him in the past. "Eve, huh?" Sorbo snorted. "Can I get you ladies anything? Maybe an apple?" Sorbo asked pointedly while staring at Eve. "No, thank you, Mr. Sorbo. We won't take too much of your time. We just have a few questions about the horse theft that occurred on set last night," Eve said matter-of-factly. "My cousin married a man named Kevin," Mrs. Melville exclaimed, startling both Sorbo and Eve. "He was a grain man, worked his hands to the bone from sunup to sundown, rain or shine. Don't make men like that anymore," Mrs. Melville mused as she stared off into the distance.
Grain men.
"Mr. Sorbo, it must not be lost on you that last night's crime very closely mirrors the one at the center of Horse Competition 4, Eve said. "Do you think that's a coincidence?" "There's no such thing as coincidences, Eve. God has a plan for everything." Sorbo flashed a smug smile. "You have a note telling you the criminal's motive, and yet you're taking up my precious newsboy's time by coming here to talk to me." Mrs. Melville regained the focus in her eyes and turned to face Eve and Sorbo. "Bess Collins and I both wish to take Kevin to the barn dance in our 15th year. Can you imagine if Kevin had fancied Bess or me instead of my dear cousin? My, how things would be different. You know what else? I remember walking to old man Tom's Corner Deli. You could fetch a lollipop for a penny." "Things sure were cheaper back then, Grandma. I bet you had a great time growing up," Eve said to her grandmother with a loving smile. Mrs. Melville gingerly sat down on Sorbo's couch. "Mr. Sorbo, the note you mentioned is almost identical to the one left by the horse thief in your movie. If it weren't for a couple of spelling mistakes, it would have been a dead ringer. I'm of the opinion that whoever took Big Moses was familiar with Horse Competition 4's script," Eve said confidently. "That means the thief is still on set." Sorbo shifted in his chair, suddenly feeling self-conscious about his spelling. Searching for a response, he chose outrage. "You think you can just drive in here from the city and accuse us, group of humble Christians, trying to make our passion project, Horse Competition 4, Satan in the Stables, of stealing Big Moses? Not only are you wrong, but your manners need some work. I hardly ever see dandelions anymore. Bess and I used to pick dandelions in an open field south of Millardtown. I'd bet a wooden nickel there aren't any dandelions in Millardtown these days," Mrs. Melville mused. Eve and Kevin both took a moment to give Mrs. Melville a polite smile before returning to their conversation. Eve started first. "I spoke with Mr. Karn, the actor who plays the head ranch hand in the movie, and he says he saw you near the stables late last night, Mr. Sorbo." "Karn? Wait, he's an actor?" Sorbo's his brow furrowed in confusion. Despite sharing scenes with Richard Karn many times, Sorbo had assumed Karn to be an actual ranch hand until this very moment. Embarrassed, Sorbo turned to insults. "Maybe if Karn had any talent, I would have known he was part of the cast. I certainly don't get confused about whether Tim Allen is an actor. I don't get confused about whether Jonathan Taylor Thomas is an actor. What were you doing near the stables last night, Mr. Sorbo?" Eve asked, maintaining her even tone. "I told you I wasn't in the stables last night," Sorbo said, his voice rising again. "Just like an Eve not to listen to a man." Eve was tired of listening to Sorbo's empty pleas of innocence and decided to get more direct with her approach. "We have you on camera. The Davidsons installed a security system when they built the stables. The cameras are in plain sight, Mr. Sorbo, and yet you still looked into one of them and smiled. You were in the stables last night, and you stole Big Moses."
He sees a camera. He knows to play up to it.
Sorbo's face went white, and he began to sweat. For as long as Sorbo could remember, his face had been unable to resist the pull of the camera.
See?
Yep.
It had become an uncontrollable addiction for Sorbo, whether he was posing for a film camera or admiring himself in a CVS checkout line. Sorbo knew he must have mugged at the stable security cameras subconsciously, his thirst for attention always in need of quenching. "Why did you steal Big Moses?" Eve asked point blank, hoping Sorbo's clear emotional turbulence would bring him to confess. "Crime is up 1,000,000% under Joe Biden. They're stealing our kids and renaming our sports teams," Sorbo screamed, as Mrs. Melville pulled a small book from her purse titled 101 Points of Dinner Guest Etiquette. "The deep state wants you to think I stole Big Moses. The deep state planted evidence to frame us honest, hardworking Americans for another of its own devious acts," Sorbo continued, spit flying from the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Sorbo, you're a well-paid actor. You have your own trailer," Eve added to further illustrate Sorbo's false alignment with everyday hard-working Americans. Sorbo shifted gears, opting for his usual tactic of topical distraction when caught in a lie. "If I'm so well paid, if you think I'm one of the elites, then why would I need to steal Big Moses?" Sorbo sat back down and leaned back in his chair. "Checkmate," he gleefully shouted, trying to convince Eve he had proven his own innocence. "Mr. Sorbo, I read on the Great American Pureflix website recently that you were trying to reboot Hercules, the legendary journeys for them.
The sad old man edition.
But that you were having difficulty securing funding for the first season. Tell me, Mr. Sorbo, did you think of a way to find the rest of the cash you need?" Eve leaned forward, deliberately choosing a seated posture in opposition to Sorbo's. Sorbo quickly used his left hand to cover the sizable check on his kitchenette table with "Sale of Big Moses" written on the memo line. "Nice theory, Eve, but there are tons of studios lining up to work with me on the Hercules reboot. They're practically lining up out the door, in fact. This one's going to have AI sea monsters in it." Bess got to visit the sea with her family after her father got a job with the railroad, and they moved west to Frisco. "I miss Bess dearly. She was the best friend I ever had," Mrs. Melville offered, peering up from her book. "You should look Bess up sometime, Grandma. I bet she'd be thrilled to hear from you after all these years," Eve told Mrs. Melville with a warm smile. Eve's grandmother had always cherished the close friendships in her life, and Eve knew reconnecting with Bess would be a thrill for all involved. "Bess was killed by a wasp," Mrs. Melville exclaimed, before resuming her research into how to hold one's knife while cutting into an angel food cake. Before Eve could follow up with Mrs. Melville on Bess's fate, another knock came at the trailer door and Joshua stepped in. "Mr. Sorbo, I'm so sorry, but you have another visitor." "I have no idea how I'm supposed to get into character as Mutt Conklin, a legendary horse rider who had to hang them up after he saw an American flag burned," bemoaned Sorbo. "If I keep getting interrupted, you know what, Joshua? Just let him in. Let's get all these surprise meetings over with." Joshua motioned outside the door for the guest to enter. A burly man in a cowboy hat and expensive boots squeezed through the frame, a wide smile on his face. "How's the morning treating you, Kev? More beautiful than a tax break out there, ain't it?" Man reared his head back to laugh, walked over to Sorbo, and gave him a hearty slap on the back. "This is Charlton Gumbo. He owns the big ranch up the road," Joshua said, introducing the trailer's newest guest to everyone already inside.
Charlton Gumbo.
"Gumbo's Heartland Ranch," Charlton stated proudly. "We host 3 of the biggest horse competitions in the region each and every year. I already know Kev, but who are these lovely ladies?" Gumbo asked as he turned to Mrs. Melville and Eve. "This is Mrs. Melville, and I'm her granddaughter Eve. We're here to ask Mr. Sorbo about Big Moses, a horse that was stolen from the Davidson family farm." "Mrs. Melville? The Mrs. Melville? Well, you hardly need an introduction, ma'am." Gumbo took off his cowboy hat in reverence. You caught the man who murdered my Uncle Pruitt when I was nothing but a boy in short pants. It's an honor." "I'm still afraid of wasps," Mrs. Melville said.
Well, killed her best friend. Of course.
"Ladies, I believe I can save you a lot of trouble when it comes to explaining Big Moses' whereabouts," Gumbo said, feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward Mrs. Melville and the work she'd done to bring his family closure after the loss of his uncle. Sorbo said suddenly, "Oh, wait just a second, Charlton. I think there's been a big misunderstanding," he said, his eyes shifting around the trailer as he searched for an escape route that wasn't there. "Kevin's right, ladies. Big Moses wasn't stolen. I bought his rights this morning from old Kev here. I've had my eyes on that stallion since I first laid eyes on him with my eyes." Gumbo smiled faintly as he remembered his first encounter with the horse. "Had to fork over a fortune, but Big Moses is the stud that makes our family over at Gumbo's Heartland complete. It's worth every penny." Sorbo's mouth opened, but he couldn't find the words he needed. Eve used Sorbo's silence to her advantage. There's just one problem, Mr. Gumbo. Big Moses wasn't Kev's to sell. The Davidson family agreed to let the production use Big Moses for the racing scenes, but he's their pride and joy. They would never agree to sell him, not for any amount. The shock on Gumbo's face revealed that this was new information to him. Kev, is this gal telling me the truth? Did you sell me another man's horse? Sorbo stuttered, unable to come up with a believable excuse and unsure if it would play well to continue blaming an isolated stolen horse on the existence of Democratic voting citizens. Disgusted with Sorbo's apparent guilt, Gumbo addressed the man he thought he'd made a deal with. Listen, Kev, I don't know how they do things in Hollyweird, but around here, a man's got to have a code. Number one rule of that code, you never, and I mean never, sell another man's horse. Come on, Charlton. Donnie Davidson and I had practically had a verbal deal in place for me to take the horse off his hands. It's as good as mine to sell, Sorbo countered. What does practically had a verbal deal mean, Mr. Sorbo? Eve asked, a smile forming at the corner of her mouth. I've thought about asking Davidson to buy Big Moses plenty of times. We just haven't had the actual talk yet. But I could have asked him about buying Big Moses, and he could have said yes. You can't prove otherwise, Sorbo barked defensively. We can't prove that you might have eventually asked Davidson to buy the horse, and we can't prove he wouldn't have agreed to the sale if you had asked. That's your defense, Mr. Sorbo? Eve asked, growing impatient with the suspect. Kev, I think you're caught dead to rights here, and I'm willing to testify to as much need be, Gumbo said sternly. You know what? Fine. I did it, okay? I took Big Moses last night, sold him to Charlton without Davidson knowing. I left that note to lead the police in another direction. I know cops hate libs as much as I do. I thought they'd run with what I wrote. How was I supposed to know Davidson hired Sherlock Holmes over here? Sorbo complained as he gestured toward Mrs. Melville, now fast asleep on the trailer's couch. You're damn right, Kev. Mrs. Melville don't miss. You went up against the toughest bird there is, and you lost. Maybe you'll think twice the next time you decide to sell another man's horse, Gumbo lectured Sorbo. While Eve believed the case was rather obvious from the start, she appreciated hearing all the kind words directed at her beloved grandmother. Another case was in the books. Big Moses would be returned to the Davidsons, and all with time left over to take Mrs. Melville to her favorite family-style restaurant for an early lunch. It's kind of funny, isn't it? Sorbo asked Eve lightheartedly as he rested his elbows on his knees. What? Eve asked, humoring Sorbo now that he'd admitted his guilt. All those years working with half horses, and now it's a horse that brings me down, Sorbo said.
Centaurs.
It took Eve a moment to realize Sorbo was referring to the mythical centaurs that appeared alongside him in Hercules' The Legendary Journeys. Just one more thing, Eve said, looking at Sorbo. How do you feel now that this is all over? Sorbo stared out the window of his trailer as Richard Karn laughed with a couple of crew members by the craft services table. The sun was higher in the sky now. It wasn't too hot. It was a perfect day, but not for Kevin Sorbo. How do I feel? Sorbo asked with a sneer on his face. Disappointed! Masterpiece.
Beautiful finish there.
And another fitting addition to the growing library of Sorbo stories for our creepypastas.
I remember one of them was more horror-like
Yeah.
the girl was reliving.
Yes, there was
an
one like that
experience.
kind of, and there might have been another one.
I think so. I listened to a few of our old creepypasta episodes, but not all of them in the lead up to this.
At one point, I told you guys, I've got the idea for my second one now.
Mhm.
And that's when I decided it would be a Mrs. Melville story.
It's pretty perfect.
Sorbo got worked into it because I needed to think of a crime.
Oh,
but
okay. I like that.
I just started with the idea that Mrs. Melville actually has no fucking idea what's going on, but this
Yeah.
reputation
So,
precedes her.
Like, had Eve done like all of it? They're like all the steps of it in your head canon.
In my head canon, no. At
She was
some
great,
point,
but
I see. And now
Yeah.
Eve was taking over for
that's
her.
why I had the thing in there about her helping Charlton Gumbo's
And that was
family.
real. That was the real thing.
Because she
Uncle
did that
Pruitt.
because that was when he was a kid. Yeah.
Sure. Mhm.
Uncle Pruitt. Yes, of course, Pruitt Gumbo.
So she's not like a total fraud. She's just senile.
She just doesn't know
She's an
what's
old
going
lady
on
now.
now or doesn't care
She's afraid
or
of
whatever.
wasps.
But Eve has inherited her gift.
Right,
So she's
yeah.
carrying it on at this point. And, wants her grandma to still feel part of the action.
Yeah, actually, their relationship was very sweet. She loved her grandma very much.
No, I loved that part of it. It made me very happy to write about them because, it made me feel better about writing Mrs. Melville that way because it's like nobody's being mean to her.
No.
In fact, quite the opposite.
Even Sorbo was pretty nice to her
Yeah,
for the most
the whole
part.
time
Like
he
didn't
was.
say any, and he's a hateful guy.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can think to describe it. The real him and the fictional him.
No, and also the idea that her everyone would be like reverent of her. So like even from the beginning, like Sorbo stops talking when she talks and stuff.
Yeah, and gives her a polite smile even though she's making no sense.
I like the idea that, of course, Kevin Sorbo, we know him as the villain. He in his own mind thinks he's the hero. And in this story, he's criticizing Richard Karn, but at the end of it, we find out Karn's laughing and joking with the crew.
Yeah, man of the people.
People like Richard Karn.
Of course they do. He's an everyman.
But Kevin Sorbo's sitting there seeing it thinking, that weird ranch hand Karn, he's
what
probably
a loser.
bothering those idiot kids.
Yeah, he does, because he doesn't see it the same way, man. Kevin Sorbo's not in touch with people. The thing about him reading his own social media posts is, like, that's not adventurous of me to say, but what brought it to my mind is when I was reading that he had once, to some Christian event, worn a suit lined with his own tweets printed out.
Oh my God.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, what a cool guy.
Wonderful.
Another thing about Richard Karn, I don't know if this is true about him or just Al on Home Improvement. Big hog.
Honkin' hog.
Yeah.
I mean, I started just associating that with Richard Karn after that episode.
Which we refer to as the
Karncock.
Karncock.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was the first story. Wonderful. Thank
Saddle
you, Brian.
but suspicion as a gem.
What was it called? The movie Horse
competition
for Satan in the Saddle.
Satan
in the stables.
Satan in the stables.
Okay.
Satan in the saddle.
There's so many S words, like the saddled in suspicion, Satan in the stables.
Well, I'm up next, and I'll be reading a story here. According to the massive page of text
I thought
in front
you were
of
going
me,
to say according to Jim and introduce some god-awful clip.
That's the name of the story that Spencer wrote, According to Jim. It's a spec script for According to Jim. Right, Spencer?
I gotta say, that's not a bad idea for one of these.
No, this one's in fact called Ricotta Room, much like the cheese, I'm assuming.
Oh, it's the cheese.
Ooh,
And
tasty
it is
room.
a creepypasta by Spencer
I love
Hendricks.
this. I'm going to start doing that next year.
Beautiful.
I might put a Brian Vaughn joint like Spike Lee does.
Oh, sure. All right, here we go. Yet again, Ricotta Room, a creepypasta by Spencer Hendricks. Well, this feels weird. We can't keep doing this, Boba Fett said to Luke Skywalker as they lay in bed together, entwined. Boba Fett brushed the hair out of Luke Skywalker's beautiful eyes. I know, Luke Skywalker said, nuzzling Boba Fett. I just can't ever get enough of you. Their bodies fit together as though they had been engineered in a lab, a love lab, especially for each other. Both Jedi and bounty hunter knew they could not stay this way long. Their lives could never intersect for more than a moment at a time. But those moments were wild, passionate affairs of the heart and the loins.
I presently feel like I'm living in some sort of parallel universe to our own.
It's like a bizarro world.
Yeah.
No matter where you go, I will always find you, Boba Fett assured Luke Skywalker. He was a bounty hunter after all, and good at his job. Luke Skywalker touched Boba Fett's horribly scarred face, kissed it all over. I was so afraid I'd lost you when you fell into the Sarlacc's mouth. You'll never lose me, Boba Fett said in a purr. He began to work his way down Skywalker's all-too-eager body. May the Force be with you, Boba Fett said. With that, he sucked Luke Skywalker off good and hard. Pete Lightning slammed his forbidden erotica book shut with disgust. He had to stop reading these things,
This is
but he was
rules.
hooked.
We've got a reversal.
This is amazing. It was his one guilty pleasure, his secret shame that all too often distracted him from his work. At 14, Pete Lightning was widely recognized as the world's greatest teen architect, but privately, he was struggling with a bad case of imposter syndrome. He shouldn't be wasting his time reading fluff. He should be designing his next masterpiece building. Besides, his mom had just called him for dinner. He's a teenager.
That was his name, right? Pete Lightning.
You nailed it, yeah. Stuffing the book under the cushion of his custom-designed bedside reading chair, Pete raced down the stairs into the kitchen, which was situated beautifully in an elegant open floor plan. Pete couldn't have designed it better himself. In fact, he had designed it himself. Pete's mom, Gretchen Lightning, looked tired. It wasn't easy being the mom of a famous child, a genius at the forefront of his industry, an iconoclast that was literally reshaping the world with his vision. Literally, he's an architect.
Yeah.
It's shapes and designs. The stress had driven her husband, Lionel Lightning, mad. He was once a talented architect in his own right, but couldn't handle the pressure over the years and had to retire to what he hoped would be a quiet life with his family. When young Pete was clearly going to be following in his father's footsteps, Lionel came apart mentally and disappeared, never to be seen again.
From the architect work.
He saw it. He saw, look at those blueprints.
Drove him mad.
And went mad.
Madness runs in the Lightning family.
Lasagna again, Pete asked warily, taking his usual place at the table. You love lasagna, Gretchen said, trying not to make eye contact. Pete had never mentioned or shown any signs of loving lasagna, but she had accidentally let a door-to-door ricotta cheese salesman trick her into buying an inordinate amount of aged ricotta cheese, which she was storing in a giant barrel hidden in the pantry. Gretchen couldn't think of a single thing anyone would need ricotta cheese for, aside from lasagna, so she started making it several times a week, hoping Pete wouldn't notice. Just as Pete reluctantly cut into his first bite and Gretchen secretly tossed a large chunk of hers under the table for Roxy, the family dog, a loud knock on the door interrupted the meal. I'll get it, Gretchen shouted, eager to push herself away from the lasagna. She did hope it wasn't that revolting ricotta cheese salesman again, however. What a swindler. It was not the ricotta cheese salesman at the door. Peering out through the peephole, Gretchen realized it was something far worse. Her heart leapt into her chest, and she raced back into the kitchen faster than her surname. Honey, don't panic. It's important to remain calm, but we have an emergency. Pete looked up from his lasagna, having not yet worked up the courage to eat on any of it yet. What is it? He asked, seemingly hopeful that it might ruin dinner. It's Forrest Whitaker, Gretchen said. He's come for us. Pete shot out of his chair, knocking his lasagna to the floor. Roxy leapt atop the plate and devoured yet another square of meaty, cheesy goodness whole, knowing in her dog heart that this is the best day of her life and that nothing could ever top it. Forrest Whitaker, Pete said, beginning to tremble. Pete was a brave boy and the world's greatest teen architect, but he was still just a boy, and the idea of Forrest Whitaker just outside of the house he drew up the blueprints for shook himself to his very core. What do we do? I don't know, honey. I knew I should have listened to you when you wanted to have that panic room installed in the initial floor plans, but I just didn't think this would ever happen to us. At the door, the knocking grew louder. Forrest Whitaker wouldn't be knocking for long. Soon the knocking would grow into a banging, and then, sometime after that, he would simply force the door in. Never mind that Pete had selected a beautiful slab of mahogany for the front door, sturdy as the day is long. Sturdy wasn't good enough to stop Forrest Whitaker. I can't wait till we get to my story and the first words of it and how many weird celebrities.
No, I know, because I saw those first words earlier.
Right on cue, the door flew open in the living room. This way, Gretchen shouted, leading Pete to the only room they could get to without having to cross paths with Forrest Whitaker, the pantry. Oh no. Roxy waddled along with them as best as she could, having eaten 2 full portions of lasagna only moments before. The 3 raced into the pantry and shut the door behind them, knowing Forrest Whitaker would be hot on their trail. This door won't hold any better than the last one, Pete yelled. That was solid mahogany imported directly from Honduras. Help me block the door, Gretchen cried. Crouching down and using all her weight against the barrel of ricotta, Pete followed suit. Why is this so heavy? Pete demanded. What's in this? I'm not sure, Gretchen shouted back, as the 2 strained with all their might against the barrel. I think it was here when we got the house. I designed this house myself, Pete reminded her, grunting louder from the effort. They were making slow progress. Through the door, they could hear Forrest Whitaker roaring as he approached the pantry. You were barely out of diapers, Gretchen shouted. I'm sure there are some things that you're here that your toddler brain wasn't aware of. They had finally gotten the barrel wedged against the door, and not a moment too soon. Forrest Whitaker had reached the pantry and was throwing his entire body at the door. The barrel held wonderfully. The door didn't budge an inch. Soon, Forrest Whitaker tired himself out and announced that he was going to have to take a nap, but that he would get through the door for sure when he got his energy back. What are we going to do? Gretchen asked in a whisper. It was hard to hear over Forrest Whitaker's snores. This barrel can't hold forever. I have a plan, Pete said. Slowly, the fear was leaving the architect inside was taking over. But we have to move the barrel back and sneak past Forrest Whitaker. We have to be fast. He could wake up any second, Gretchen said, hoping her brilliant son had a plan as brilliant as he was. Mother and son got to work trying to move the barrel, but without any way to get between the barrel and the door, it was impossible to create enough leverage to move it. Forrest Whitaker's snores continued on the other side of the door, but they both had a sense time was running out. It's no use, Pete said. This pantry is our tomb. We have to eat our way out, Gretchen said, her voice quiet but firm. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. If she and her 14-year-old architect's son and lasagna-filled dog were going to make it out of the pantry alive and escape Forrest Whitaker, they were going to have to dig into the giant barrel of ricotta cheese and need enough of it to move the barrel. How do you know we can eat whatever's in there? Pete asked, scrunching his face in confusion. When he scrunched his face up, he looked very much like the little boy he was, instead of the visionary who had single-handedly led the restoration project of the Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral after a portion of it had burned down several years back. Seeing her son's scrunched-up face and remembering how vulnerable he really was despite his accomplishments helped give her the strength she needed for what was to come. Without another word, Gretchen tore the lid off the barrel, reached inside, broke off a huge chunk of ricotta, and started eating. Is that ricotta? Pete asked, staring at his mother incredulously. Why do we have so much ricotta in here? Gretchen was too busy chewing to answer. She locked eyes with her son, pointing at the cheese impatiently. Do we have to eat it? Pete asked, his face still scrunched. Can't we just shovel it out and throw it on the floor? There's not enough room in here, Gretchen said with sadness in her voice and cheese in her mouth. We'll suffocate if we try to unload it. Eating is the only way. Pete could see there was no other option. Worse, every second he spent using his mouth for anything than gobbling up huge portions of ricotta cheese was taking them 1 second closer to having to face a fully rested Forrest Whitaker. With a sigh, Pete stuck his hand into the barrel and started eating. Soon, Roxy got her appetite back and did her part as well. What a good dog.
Good dog.
Several hours later, none of the pantry occupants could make eye contact with each other, but the barrel looking much less imposing. Roxy whimpered, hiding behind a crate of cleaning rags so no one could force her to eat more ricotta cheese. Pete had never really liked cheese that much to begin with, and now he'd eaten more than probably anyone ever had, all in one sitting, all just to escape Forrest Whitaker. But the plan worked. The barrel moved, not easily, but just enough to slide back and pull the door open a crack. Outside, Forrest Whitaker was still napping, his snores not as intense now. He seemed nearly to the point of stirring. What's the plan, Pete? Gretchen whispered as they stepped over Forrest Whitaker's slumbering body. Follow me, Pete whispered back, almost tripping on Forrest Whitaker's left arm. When Pete took his next step, he realized he hadn't almost tripped after all, and Forrest Whitaker wasn't napping anymore. His foot was caught firmly in Forrest Whitaker's powerful grip. With a yelp, Pete kicked free and took off for the stairs, Gretchen and Roxy racing after him, the ricotta cheese bouncing around inside the lot of them. The group clambered up the stairs, huffing and puffing, knowing Forrest Whitaker was right behind them. This better be a good plan, Pete, Gretchen said as they ran, because we're trapped up here if it doesn't work. You underestimate me, Mom, Pete said, and there was a little bit of smugness in his tone. The mother and Gretchen thought about grounding him later, but went along with it for now since she could actually feel Forrest Whitaker's hot breath on the back of her neck.
The last king of Scotland.
Saw Gerrera in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have a sex story about him someday. Or Spencer will, apparently. Together they burst into Pete's room where the brilliant boy led them straight to his custom-designed reading chair. On the floor, just under the chair where no one would ever spot it, was a small lever. Pete gave it a kick, and just like that, the floor opened up beneath them, a magnificently disguised trapdoor no one could have ever spotted. Isn't the lever in full view?
That's under the chair.
Oh, fair enough. On the other side of the trapdoor was a tube that carried the three of them swiftly underground, and then roughly deposited them on the ground of what looked to be a basement. First came Pete. He landed with a smack on the basement floor, which was something he probably should have anticipated when he had this secret room built within the house. Next was Gretchen, whose fall was softened a bit thanks to landing on Pete. Roxy came last. Pete's custom-designed chair had gotten pulled into the tube as the floor opened beneath it. It landed harmlessly beside them with an unceremonious thud. Peter Billingsley Lightning, Gretchen exclaimed. You built a panic room without my permission. She was equal parts annoyed and impressed. You know I have to be true to my creative vision, Mom, Pete said, grinning. You little rascal, she said. Now that we're in the panic room, Forrest Whitaker will leave us alone. That's the only way to get away from him. This time, Pete said, an adult understanding revealing itself in his tone. Forrest Whitaker never really goes away forever, does he? No, Pete, Gretchen agreed. And I shouldn't have taken it for granted he would never come after us. You always hear stories about Forrest Whitaker invasions, but I thought it was the kind of thing that only happened to other people. We'll be more prepared next time. Mom? Pete asked. The three of them were finally starting to relax. The panic room had food and water and amenities, to last them for as long as they needed for Forrest Whitaker to go away. It was going to be all right. Gretchen asked, absent-mindedly stroking Roxy. Do we have to eat lasagna ever again? Gretchen laughed, and at first it was just a chuckle, but it quickly turned into a laughing fit, followed by a series of gags. Never again, honey. I don't think lasagna's that good anyway. There's just nothing else you can do with ricotta cheese. Pete sighed in relief. No more lasagna, and no more ricotta cheese. No more Forrest Whitaker. And with this reminder of the fragility of life and of the need to make every second count, maybe no more... Pete, what in the world is this book that fell out of your chair? The end. Pete and Gretchen Lightning and Roxy will return in the next adventure.
Look how they both say that too.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I also, I think Gretchen's going to get into that book.
Oh, I bet Gretchen's really into it. Luke and Boba going at it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd watch.
I don't know if I could actually do the lore with them at any point meeting in bed like that for their tryst, but I did my best. I don't know.
I mean, the timing works out because it would be after Luke whacks him and he goes into the pit and gets out.
I did some brief Googling, and so Boba Fett, he didn't die when they said he did in the movie, right? Okay.
Nope.
So that
he fell into the Sarlacc burped, and then later, sands of Tatooine have settled, and Jabba's skiff
The Sarlacc,
barge
of course, being
broken.
something of a desert anus.
Yeah, desert butthole, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
And out of the ground, we see the gloved hand of Boba Fett as he fires up his jetpack, and his Mandalorian armor saved him from the digestive juices of the Sarlacc.
What's got me there?
And then he got, they took all of his armor, the Jawas did, and then he grew up with the Tuskens for a bit, but then he got the armor back from Din Djarin the Mandalorian.
I should specify that when Van says Tuskens, it's not Italian people.
It is not Tuscan, Tusken. They're the people who go,
but someone had to have told, I know we've talked about this before, Van. Someone had to have gone up to George Lucas and said, Tuskens is real.
And you know what he did? He went, that's fine, I know.
Spell it dumb.
I understand, it'll be different.
Well, George, you could just say another name. You could make up a different one.
You make all sorts of stuff up, George. No, not this. This is real.
And also, didn't he come up with Tuskens because he didn't want to say sand people any longer? Which, by the way, good call.
Well, he still called them sand people for a while.
Ooh.
But yeah. No, beautiful job, Spencer.
Yes,
that was
excellent.
wonderful.
So what happened there is, I only had that seed of an idea. Let's flip it because we had Pete Lightning.
Which is really
I wanted
good.
more of Pete Lightning. Of course, I did the best I could with
Van
the lore.
texted me earlier today and was like, I've thought about writing a whole Pete Lightning story, which is why this was especially gratifying.
For the one Brian's about to read. But
now there could even be more instances of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had absolutely no real story of Pete Lightning. So I thought, well, what might he do? He might build weird wings in his house or something. And I thought, what about a panic room? Forrest Whitaker was in a movie called Panic Room.
Yeah,
and the rest of it just happened.
Beautiful.
He was
That's
the
all.
criminal with the heart of gold. You know who else is in that movie? Jared Leto.
Really?
Gross.
Yeah, he's just one of the other robbers.
I have to
he's
say,
the real shithead one.
I don't know a lot about Forrest Whitaker, but I will say, if he came to my house, he's welcome. I was just kidding, Forrest Whitaker. I'm sure you're not a terrible person who
Seems like a lovely
shows
man.
up at people's houses and hurts them. Although he doesn't really hurt anyone, he's just there, and they don't want him
the
there.
butler. In The Butler,
It sure was. Yep.
That movie sucked.
I'm going to do a little bit of an A-side here and say that there is a YouTube video that you gentlemen should watch, as well as anyone listening to this. And it is about
Who's
the
it by
movie.
your favorite guy, Mr. Beast?
No.
Oh, wait, no, that was Vran.
Yeah. No. This is actually about Willem Dafoe because it's talking about the movie American Psycho, of course, the Christian Bale movie. The reason this came to my mind is because you mentioned Jared Leto, who's also,
he is.
for some reason, in American Psycho.
Well,
but,
he's not, if you use him in just
That's fine.
a small role and
It's
it's
fine.
the right thing, he's fine.
Well, this particular video mentions that, of course, Willem Dafoe played the investigator, the cop,
Yeah.
who's looking into Christian
This
Bale's
is a movie,
character.
American Psycho is a movie where Willem Dafoe is the normal guy.
Yep. Well, anyway, he was only in a couple of scenes. So what the director did with Willem is said, we're going to film each of these 3 takes at least. He said in the first take, I believe it was a female director, I can't remember, said, in the first take, I want you to play it like your detective character is completely oblivious and doesn't suspect Patrick Bateman of this murder at all. In the second take, I want you to play it that your character maybe kind of suspects it, isn't sure, is somewhere in the middle. And then the third take, your character believes he did it and you're just trying to catch him. And then what the director did was take chunks of each of those and put them all together. And this video shows you how he's playing it during each scene.
That's cool.
And you can see, because he's a brilliant actor, of course.
Yeah, he's great.
And you can see because, like, for example, when he...
You know what else? Huge hog on that guy, too, for real.
That's right. They had to get like a body double for that Jesus movie.
Yeah, they're like, we don't even know what to fucking do here, man. Jesus could have never had this. Man, I bet you he did it, though. What do you guys think? How big was Jesus' penis?
I think it was an average length.
Okay, humble man, yeah,
Humble
sure.
man, yeah. Carpenter.
Yeah.
Do we know how tall Jesus was? I guess everybody was short,
The guy who
right?
played him in the movie was like 6'2", I think.
Yeah.
That's pretty big. I don't think Jesus would be that big.
No, that'd be a little intimidating.
A little
like,
bit.
That's the guy who's like, I will take care of you and protect you and save you, and it's like, you're gigantic, Jesus.
Van, no offense. I can't really trust anyone much taller than me being a man of the people. I don't think you guys know.
No, that's true.
I don't think you guys know anything about it.
How do you know anything about my plight, you giant man?
Yeah.
I can't argue
That's what you'd
against
ask
it.
Jesus.
It's fine. I get it.
I'd like to also add my own aside to the end of that, as I don't think I could get sick of lasagna, so those people are nuts.
Me
I would
either.
eat as many lasagnas as I
I'm
had.
a real Garfield with that stuff.
I could, but it would take a while, and I love ricotta. Ricotta's very good. Anyway, go watch that video. You can see amazing acting on display.
Yeah.
And you can interpret the scene a couple different ways. Number one, you can interpret it as it's like this cop's just a weird dude and he's just a weird guy. Or you can interpret that we're supposed to be watching this movie and technically it's from Bateman's perspective and Bateman can't read people.
And he's also going crazier as the movie goes on. Willem Dafoe also, anybody who has not seen The Lighthouse with him and Robert Pattinson, that movie's incredible. And if you happen to have watched that during the pandemic while being crazy, while living with one other crazy man, it really strikes a chord you couldn't even believe.
All right, have it your way. I like your lobster. Yeah, great movie. Well, we've got one more story for you guys.
Yes, we do.
It's my story.
Death Race 3000 by Van Lee.
So have at it, Brian.
Is it a creepypasta? It doesn't say on your paper.
Yeah, how am I supposed to fucking know? And at the end, there's nothing about another adventure. How am I supposed to know if there will be one or not?
I guess we'll just have to find out.
Yeah.
We'll read it and decide if we think it's a creepypasta.
Does it say, what did I type on the cover page?
Just Death Race 3000 by Van Lee.
Oh, okay. I didn't add anything fun.
No. I mean, I find that pretty fun.
It's whimsical,
I guess.
guess.
Death Race 3000.
I hope we have a futuristic sci-fi, like dystopian creepypasta going on here.
Well, I'll tell you what we're getting right away, as Van alluded to earlier, is another celebrity appearance. And I mean, it's the first two words I'm going to say. Sean Penn? Are you Sean Penn? I heard a voice say behind me, "Okay, Sean, showtime." I thought to myself before letting out a sigh and spinning to face the person who blurted out those words. I smiled a great big smile at her and scrunched my eyes up real good because that's what people expect from Sean Penn. The woman's eyes initially got real wide, but then she tilted her head in a confused manner before mumbling, "Oh, yeah, you are Sean Penn, huh?" I said to her, "Of course. After all, I'm a little bit sour and kind of rough to deal with in person, just like Sean Penn is. And after all, I'm under contract. I can't lie about my name." As I said this, I held up my left ring finger, which has an always present gaudy ring, and I acted like that made sense, so she believed it. She smiled and told me she really loved me in Taxi Driver, and I had to say, "Actually, my dear, that was Harvey Keitel, but that's okay. I bet you'd love a DVD copy of the Angry Birds movie, in which I play Terrence the Angry Bird, and even a pic with Sean Penn, wouldn't you?" She agreed, and I made sure we were in a pretty dark area when the picture was taken, and ultimately she went home super happy with a signed copy of Sean Penn's 2016 animated hit of the same name as the mobile phone game, Angry Birds. This doesn't get any easier, I thought to myself as I ambled home to my modest condominium in Toddler's Wales, South Dakota. You see, I didn't lie to that woman. My name is Sean Penn. It's my birth name even, but I'm not the Sean Penn. In fact, my name is even spelled the other way you spell Sean. You know, with all the numbers. A few years ago, after the umpteenth time a traffic cop or a tennis line judge said my name being the same as the actor's was hilarious and brutally ironic and a Sisyphean venture into the nightmare's realm of chaos and malfeasance, that I decided I was going to do something about it. I figure the world needs Sean Penn, and they have him right here, so why don't I get plastic surgery to look more like Sean Penn and spend my days wandering the streets pretending to be Sean Penn, giving people autographs and telling them stories and listening to their Hollywood pitches like how Fast Times at Ridgemont High would have been a better movie if they just went a little slower. So that's what I do for a living. I spend my time as a professional Sean Penn impersonator whose name is actually Shaw 833N Penn.
It's got all those numbers.
And therefore, it's not a lie when I say I am Sean Penn. It's not clear how I make money from this, but I bet it happens. I entered my condo where I keep my collections of oils and smells, and sometimes I get a little fun, like to rush through the living room pretending it's full up with a party and a wealthy dowager through the party, but I'm not allowed because I'm from a different wealthy family, so I have to get through the room quickly before a security guard spots me. I didn't do that today, though. Instead, I put down my bag that has Sean Penn's bag written on it in this font I found online for free called Big Business. But as I put my bag down on the floor kind of hard so my downstairs neighbor knows I'm the alpha here, I noticed a big hole in the floor where normally there would be a floor. It was about 3 or 6 cubits across, and I gingerly approached it, peering over the edge to see what would be below a floor. It turns out that all the way down into my downstairs neighbor's apartment, a meteor had crashed through and broke their floor too. It was then that I noticed 2 things. First, that not only was the floor a hole, the up floor was also a hole. So this meteor didn't come from my condominium, it came from somewhere high, like a sky condominium. The second thing I noticed was that my neighbor's apartment, despite being below mine and the building being uniformly shaped, like a series of cubes stacked up like cubes do, seemed to be way bigger than mine. I knew I could do just about 3 full backflips from one wall to the other in my place, but in theirs, I bet you I could do 3 full backflips from one wall to the other, but a little bit more comfortably. As I stood there thinking about backflips for a couple hours, my downstairs neighbor came home from her job at the Menards working at the garden section. One time when she was working, I crouched behind a stack of houseplants until after they closed, and then when she closed the register, I jumped out and screamed, "Menards, Menards, full of old bones and great deals on building supplies!" But I tripped on a hawk statue and hit my nose on the floor. It was a whole bloody mess and the cops were called, but since I agreed not to sue them, they let me take home the hawk statue and all sorts of lawn furniture. But I'm banned from Menards now, which is a problem when I need to buy a frozen pizza and a new toilet.
Well,
No, that's really true. Also, did Menards always have the food part? I don't think so.
I think that's new.
Because I was in one in St. Louis 1 million years ago, and that's the only time, and I don't remember there being that section.
I think it was like a hardware store at first, and now it's that plus food plus candy plus, I don't know what else.
I went in there with my mom looking for a floor lamp, like right after I moved back to Springfield.
Did you say big money?
No, it would have cost me big money.
That's not what they say in their commercials. You're supposed to save big money at Menards.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Menard might be full of manure. Anyway, she came home and said, "What the fuck?" when she saw the meteor hole in the floor and up floor, which to her is my floor. So I just yelled back at her, "What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck?" until she went to a different room because I was frightening her. I decided to check this meteor out, so I fell through the hole and landed hard on my arm, which probably is going to have a cool bruise by now. Upon closer inspection, the meteor wasn't a meteor. It was a meteorite. That's because meteors apparently happen in the sky and disappear, but when it makes it to Earth and doesn't burn up, that means it's a meteorite. So it was just semantics. It was kind of shiny, so I picked it up and popped it in my mouth, but it was way too hard to chew, so instead I just kind of held it there until too much spit gathered up and I had to spit it out, leaving a huge pile of saliva on my downstairs neighbor's stupid kitchen. I yelled out to her that this was my meteorite and she can't have it and I'm very strong anyway, so that way she wouldn't try and take it from me because she knew I was too strong for taking from. I went back to my condominium and thought about maybe making the hole in the floor my new toilet, especially since my old toilet clogged up and I can't get a new one because I'm banned from Menards. Before I could use my new toilet, I fell asleep and had a dream where I was trying to buy some eggs from Menards, but the manager wouldn't let me because I'm banned from Menards. Just as I was about to tell the manager about my many egg coupons, I was awoken by the sound of the meteorite. It had begun to quiver and vibrate, and a stream of light came bursting from its rocky core. I put a bag over it and tried to roll over and go back to sleep, but suddenly a loud pop occurred, and I checked, and the meteorite had broken open to reveal a letter inside. The letter said, "Dear SHA833N Penn, you aren't actually the actor Sean Penn, and I know this. But also your destiny is important to all of humanity, and so I need you to go meet my emissary, God Jr., at Menards tomorrow morning. Don't forget to bring your most prized possession, the one given to you by your mother on the eve of her death. P.S. Reminder, humanity has a lot riding on this, so don't be late and don't forget to set an alarm. The next morning, I totally forgot about the letter and was busy yelling at kids who were in my condo's parking lot when a knock at my door came knocking. It was a man who claimed he was God Jr., and he was pretty mad because he had to take city transportation here when I didn't meet him at Menards. He came into my apartment and told me he was going to explain everything, but first, he needed to get his eat on. And so he ate all the fruit snacks I had saved up. Once he was finally full, he sat me down on the couch and looked deep into my forehead before grabbing me by the ears and saying in his heavy South Antarctican accent, "For the last 25 years, your family is tied to the fate of the world, and now you must take your rightful place in subverting evil." But I protested and told God Jr. that I didn't have any family. I never knew my father, aside from a hat that he left behind that had a gem in it as well as a bunch of feathers. And my mother died when I was very young, like, 22? I'm in my late 20s now. He scoffed and told me to come with him, and he'll teach me what needs to be taught. I figured being a Sean Penn impersonator actually kind of sucked anyway, so why not? So I packed up as many coats as I could get a hold of, and God Jr. told me it was actually pretty warm where we were going, so don't worry about all those coats. But I didn't really trust him on this, and secretly packed away even more coats into all the grocery bags I had lying around the condo. I asked him where his car was, and he said he didn't have one, but we could take mine. But I also don't have a car, and when I told him this, he was a little flabbergasted, saying, "How do you not have a car in America, especially out here in South Dakota?" So we ended up calling an Uber, and after a bit, our driver, Jerry H., arrived to take us to our destination. But we used God Jr.'s iPhone 13, so I couldn't see where we were going. Jerry played classic rock a little too loudly the whole way there, and God Jr. was a little annoyed because he wanted to tell me some important stuff, but Jerry and I instead harmonized Hot for Teacher by Van Halen, and so God Jr. instead tried to nap. When he finally dozed off, I told Jerry we should play that game where you look for letters of the alphabet and road signs, and he told me he had to pay attention to driving, so I played it by myself. Once I got to H, I screamed right in God Jr.'s ear that Highland Landscaping in Elk Point near the Nebraska border was my H word, and God Jr. yelled at me for being loud. Jerry told us if we didn't shut up, he'd kick us out and go home, and after all, the tip wasn't enough to cover a hassle. Eventually, I told them all I had to pee, and if we didn't stop, I was going to pee all over God Jr. and Jerry's SUV. And so we pulled over at McDonald's. After about 20 minutes, Jerry and God Jr. came looking for me, and I was playing in the ball pit because this McDonald's still had one, and most of them don't.
They got rid of them.
They did for some reason.
I think it's an insurance thing.
Yeah, and they're gross. And,
well, they're, yeah.
You know, broken,
glass,
bones probably, and sweat.
Needles.
After telling them I would only get back in the car if they bought me a McFlurry and a Cardi B and Offset meal deal. But even though they did, the meal didn't come with a cool toy, just a bunch of rap lyrics, which I tried belting out even though I didn't know the beat or the songs. Finally, after I fell asleep in Jerry's car, I woke up to God Jr. shaking me and asking me why I took my shoes off in the car, and to hurry up and put them on because Jerry has to drive all the way back home. I pretended not to know how to tie my shoes, which made both of them very angry, and God Jr. dragged me out into the parking lot. We were at an empty racetrack in a place called The Pit Stop, which I later found out was because one time Brad Pitt had used the toilet there, so they changed the name to have a second T in it.
Yeah, the Pit
Stop. I spent a little while trying to figure out which toilet he used, but neither looked like it had been pooped in by anyone from Hollywood, and trust me, I would know. God Jr. led me to an area in the back where a bunch of race cars were sitting around with their hoods open, and a mysterious race of tiny persons working on them. The weird little guys were maybe 2 feet tall, so I quickly grabbed one and stuck him in my coat pocket, and he kept biting me in the side. God Jr. acted all disgusted with me and pulled the little guy out of my pocket, but he gave me the finger before going back to work on a car. I'll get one eventually. They'll never stop me. At the end of the room was a blanket draped over a very car-shaped object, and God Jr. told me it was my chariot, and I was to ride it in the Death Race 3000, the upcoming race for humanity's either destruction or salvation. He said he was going to teach me how to tear ass with 1,000 horsepower, and I got lost thinking about how they would steal all the power from those horses just to put it in the car. God Jr. pulled the sheet off the car-shaped object, and I was surprised to see it wasn't a car. It was a Cybertruck. I told God Jr. it looked really stupid, and he got kind of mad at me and told me I was just a hater and didn't understand how smart and cool this vehicle was. And then I realized that God Jr. was actually Elon Musk. Great, I said loudly. Now I'm being trained by an apartheid-funded Nepo baby who thinks he's way smarter than he is, and every engineer in his various businesses hate him because he's actually an emotionally stunted 13-year-old boy who never got the love he wanted from his father and is stuck in the mushy, middle-aged body of a ketamine-riddled oligarch. But this made him mad, and he walked out the door saying he was going to call me a cuck on Twitter, but he called it X, which I'm not ever going to do. I decided I didn't want to do the Death Race 3000. Honestly, if humanity is going to die out because of this, then whatever. That's probably for the best. So I snatched up one of those little guys and put him in one of the cat carriers I found, and he kept screaming for me to let him go because he has a wife and family to get back to. But I know better than to trust little guys like that. I dragged the cat carrier behind me for a while, and eventually he got tired of yelling and resigned to his fate. So after a few miles, I stopped at a diner at the side of the road called Love to Eat. That's LUV2EAT, which confused me because that sounds more like a license plate than a diner, but I was hungry. The little guy told me his name was Fernie, and if I would let him out, he'd be my sidekick for a while, so I said okay and let him out. I mean, he tried to get away, but after I gave him a good thumping with a newspaper, he learned his lesson. So it was me and Fernie against the world.
So demeaning. Thump.
At Love to Eat, Fernie and I were looking at the menu, and I told him it would be okay if he ordered off the kids' menu, which made him mad because he said he's actually an old man in his little person species. He even said the name of his species, but I wasn't listening. Instead, yelled over him saying, "My tummy needs nommies," which shut him up real good because it was rude. As we sat there eating, he asked me very politely if I could take him back to the racetrack because his boss is probably mad at him for leaving work, and he explained that they don't have a very good union and it's an at-will employment state, so they'll just fire you for anything. I wasn't interested in that, though, so I asked if he thought I could fit all of them inside my mouth. He tried to distract me by asking if I wanted dessert, but I knew exactly what Fernie was up to, and I pointed at him real hard, and I said, "I'll never forget to try and put all of you in my mouth, Fernie," and he looked rather uncomfortable. But eventually the waitress came over with a big grin on her face, and I knew exactly what that meant and prepped mentally for the discussion to come. She said, "Excuse me, are you Sean Penn?" And I responded, "I sure am the actor Sean Penn. I'm 5'8" and 3/4 inches tall, and I was in both Carlito's Way and 1997's U-Turn alongside Nick Nolte, who's a friend of mine." The waitress asked Fernie if he would take a picture of us, and she wasn't even weirded out by how probably all of them could fit in my mouth at once. And I told her I'd mail an autographed copy of the 2016 animated feature film Angry Birds when I got home. But she had one of those cameras that prints out the picture automatically, so she framed it and asked me to sign it with something uplifting, and she'll put it on the wall of celebrities. So I wrote, "To Love to Eat Diner. I was once married to Scarlett Johansson," which seems a little weird, but is true. She loved it and hung my picture up right between Tom Sizemore and Jon Voight. It was then that I knew I needed to meet my fate head on, so I gobbled up Fernie in my mouth and ran as hard as I could back to the racetrack. I knew I had a lot of training ahead of me to win the race for humanity, so I spit Fernie out and he reunited with his stupid family or whatever, and I got to work. I won the race. I've read that line a lot of times in these
At least the third time.
creepypastas. In the winner's circle were all the important people. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Val Kilmer, Ashley Judd, and all the other members of the cast of 1995's Heat. Plus God Jr., Stephen Van Zandt, Fernie, Police Chief O'Malley, Tim Robbins, Richard Petty, and of course this one horse that was covered in ants. I pulled my hot rod up to the winner's circle and God Jr., I mean Elon Musk, approached to tell me that I did a good job. He reached out to shake my hand, but before I could even react, I saw a glint of a knife out of the corner of my eye. But that's not all. I saw the glint of yet another knife out of the corner of my other eye. Then glints and eyes and knives everywhere, and in an instant, Elon Musk, aka God Jr., crumpled to the ground with a vacant look in his eyes, the life having been stabbed out of him. I'm getting hard.
I know.
When I looked up to see who had stabbed the world's richest asshole, I saw an army of actors and horses. each with a bloody knife in their hands. Police Chief O'Malley yelled for everyone to be quiet and he'll get to the bottom of this. After he inspected Elon Musk's bloated, dead body and counted over 100 stab wounds, he checked all the knives of everyone there, even the ant-covered horse and NASCAR legend Richard Petty, and determined that no one here stabbed Elon Musk, so everyone can go free and humanity is saved. Tim Robbins stepped forward, clapped me on the back, and said, "This is truly a Shawshank Redemption." The end. Okay, that was extremely fun. I laughed really hard several times and had trouble keeping my composure.
Death Race 3000. I sat down, like I said, I listened to a handful of these, and the first 2 years we did it, I had 2 race-based stories that were
and they included
stupidly.
the name, hold on, and I think I might be able to remember this.
Let's see.
Penny Codsworthmanshire?
Uncle Penny Codsworthmanshire or something like that.
It's right around that. That's why when Spencer unleashed a similar thing on me, I was like, I've been training for this name that's a combination of names.
And there was Tough Gordman was the first one.
Yeah.
He died because his dad, Rich, who was also Richard Petty, was also his nemesis townhome
Tough
Ted.
Gordman was the inspiration for what I had Kevin Sorbo's character named in the horse movie. I named him like Mutt Conklin or something.
Yeah.
I was trying to come up with a similar sounding
That's perfect.
syllabic name.
And then the second one had his brother, Jeff Gordman. But they were gibberish stories that were from the perspective of a clearly crazy person.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do again. I was, again, debating, do I do another Pete Lightning story? Or do another crazy person story?
These really lend themselves to, for me anyway, like surprising laughs because of how things are phrased.
The absurdity and
There's also a part in here that I think accidentally or perhaps intentionally summarizes sort of how I feel about the world. And that's the part where the main character realizes that if Elon Musk is God, there is no point in humanity.
Yeah, just let it all burn.
That's the part where I actually thought, like, he just wasn't going to do the race at all. Like, the main character was like, there's a death race. The thing is called Death Race. And it's like, I'm just not going to do Death Race.
That kind of weirdly is, it like paints the picture, I think, in my mind when I think like, oh, if this is what the world's going to be or whatever, then, I'm just not doing any of that.
I mean, honestly, look, this is terrible, but I'm done. The government doesn't work. The U.S. government is over.
We're in a real tough spot here.
They're just announced this week when we're recording, Elon Musk has an office inside the White House.
Yeah.
He is an unelected official that has been given an office in the White House solely because he has a lot of money. We're toast. We're done. This is it. It's over.
This is the kind of thing that's so wild to me because, I mean, any person on the street would have absolutely balked at this even 10 years ago.
But now it's commonplace.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we had fun reading our creepypastas we wrote.
This was a lot of fun,
Great time as always.
I love doing this every year. We, again, had a weird schedule stuff last year after the death of Vladimir Guerrero, my cat, R.I.P., and we had to get these in because this is one of the best things we do every year.
We love it.
We love to write these things, and I'm glad we managed to squeeze them in this year. They'll be back in October of 2025 as well, so just a few months away. We'll have to have a few more stories. Maybe I'll come up with my prompt over the next week or two.
There you go.
That's a good idea. Story. We're just a gestation length away.
That's all we are. Just one baby, one normal baby away from another creepypasta
one normal
episode.
Baby.
If you like what we do, you can find us all over the World Wide Web at Blue Sky, various other social media sites, not Facebook, not Twitter, obviously.
No.
You can find us at bootuinc.com. There's written stuff. There's bonus stuff on there. We're on youtube.com/BooTubeInc. We are everywhere. Just Google Bootu Inc., patreon.com/Bootu Inc. Extra bonus shows on there. So let's get out of here with what is your favorite of the like traditional monster creatures? Like there's ghosts, there's zombies, all that stuff. What do you go for? Like if there's a new horror movie, what is it about?
Do we want it to be something that do we think like actually frightens us or just something that we enjoy?
Like maybe you want to watch a vampire movie because you like vampires.
Sure.
Or you're Brian and you want to say vampire.
I want to very briefly say I'm excited. I haven't done it yet, but I am excited to see both this new Nosferatu and the original, which I've never seen. I'm very curious to do that.
The new one is fun.
I'm excited.
I'd really like to see it. It's Robert Eggers, right?
Yes, it needs to be about 25 minutes shorter.
It's Robert Eggers.
Great, exactly. But it is very, very fun. And there's a TikTok trend, by the way, going about that movie. Because have you seen like the trailers?
Yeah.
Not really.
I watched part of one sort of on accident and I didn't know what it was at first. And it was like, what's this new horror movie?
This looks weird. Well, you know who Nosferatu is. And it's what's his name? Bill Skarsgård doing the voice in it. You will come to Canto Transylvania. Anyway, there's a trend of him, because there's a lot of sex in this movie, saying sexy things or like, you must bounce on it crazy
Yeah, well,
style.
the thing is, vamps have always fucked.
Yeah, that's true. Can't argue with that.
And so does Nosferatu.
I will say, and I'm excited about that, but in terms of what historically growing up really terrified me, and I would say it's maintained, we just don't get many good movies like that have worked for me, but I was always very frightened of werewolves. I do think that would be my choice of just the most outright terrifying thing. Especially how they always played up that transformation thing so well.
How it's agonizing.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that you saw Teen Wolf as a child and it imprinted on you and that you were afraid of them but also afraid of their basketball ability?
No, the imprinting happens in Twilight with the werewolves, like Jacob Diz on that baby.
Yeah.
That might have helped, but instead I saw a movie like Silver Bullet from the 80s, which actually was good.
Shit out of me when I was a kid.
It scared me so bad.
I've not seen it, I don't think.
There's not very many, and I know they did a recent Wolfman one with Julia Garner, which supposedly is just okay. It's not that great, but there's not been really very many good Wolfman movies, but I would go for a good one because that's the scariest concept to me.
Okay, so let's put a number on it. You've played Skyrim 100 times. How many times did you do the turn into werewolf quest for the Thieves Guild or whatever, the guild or whatever it is?
Oh, I probably have done that like 5 or 6 times.
So a handful though, at least.
Yeah.
But not every time.
Because I can't stand it. I don't like it. I just do it to finish the quest. Sure. But I don't want to be a werewolf in Skyrim.
See, I don't like it. Yeah, so I've never completed it.
They didn't implement it well, unfortunately, but you can get it cured later.
Sure.
Just like in real life. You become a werewolf, there's a way to fix that.
As long as you've been infected with vampirism and you can drink the potion
that's one way to do it.
Over 2 days, you're fine.
That's one way to do it.
You're fine.
Yeah,
Brian?
Totally.
Monster?
So my favorite thing is probably
Brian's all about monster.
When a movie like takes some monster you don't care about or like an urban legend one that's not really been covered and then makes me afraid of it somehow, even if the movie's not good. This has happened to me before because something about it being a creature I don't know lore or rules for freaks me out.
The unknown.
Mm-hmm. It's why I was afraid consistently during my rewatch of the Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere, despite I don't think it's probably very good at all, but it freaks me out a little. But I'd like to give an answer to your actual question. And that to me is probably ghosts, because I feel like a ghost movie tends to be really suspense heavy, really like sort of like mind scares over visceral scares.
Sure. And honestly, my answer was going to be ghost. I do want to point out though that there has been a dearth of like actual horror mummy related things. Like we had those weird mummy movies with The Rock or whatever.
Yeah.
But those were more about the lore. No, I
think you're thinking about WrestleMania.
Maybe that is what I'm thinking about. No, that's the Yeti, as he's called, or whatever it was.
No, yeah, that's right.
But no. I think we need real claws around the head mummy.
Yeah, sure.
We need another one of those. Get on it, Hollywood. Sean Penn, you can be the mummy.
And it can't be that seduction cinema movie with the mummies where they're just nude women.
No, it can be that. That's fine.
From when I was in high school.
I just
fine
also
too, I guess.
want the other thing.
Yeah, both need to exist.
You know what? Sex and mummies, they go hand in hand.
That's fine. I mean, what is unraveling a mummy but nudifying it?
Spooky, very spooky, spooky, very spooky, happy Halloween.
Oh, crap!
Greetings, fellow poopers. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Mike, and you are cordially invited to check out Oh Crap, Our Fecal Misfortunes and Foibles.
It's a podcast about poop stories, from hilarious, disgusting, embarrassing, to even heartfelt.
After all, everybody poops.
I know I do.
Damn right. So join us for some shits and giggles. Literally, find us on Spotify.